Okay, everybody, welcome back. Again, my name is Brian Tully, just making sure we're not sharing my screen anymore. Good. Today's a special day because we have as our guest a colleague and a friend, Shannon Miller. She is a practicing attorney down in Florida. And I'll give her a better introduction in just a moment, but that's who you see up there with me. This is our Senior Advocacy Forum. We do this monthly. It's a part of our monthly series of webinars where we try to focus on different beneficial topics, helping our families, our loved ones, our clients with different financial, legal, and care-based matters that can help them live a little more enjoyable, peaceful life. Now, the topic today is protecting our seniors. And as I said, we're joined today with an expert on senior abuse and senior exploitation, which is an unfortunate topic, but as I've said in some of my social media posts, it's a necessary conversation. Shannon Miller is a Florida board certified attorney specializing in elder law, and she practices out of Gainesville, Florida, which is getting a little bit of rain today. She's been practicing for nearly 30 years and has been instrumental in rolling out the Exploitation Injunction law across the state of Florida and has assisted in the drafting of the new powerful anti-exploitation laws, which became effective back in July of 2021. So welcome, Shannon. Thank you for being here. It's great to have you and to see you again.
Thank you. And I am reporting live from Hurricane Alley. I feel like Jim Cantori right now. Okay, what's coming next? What's coming next?
Truly.
Yeah, good. I'm glad we could make it. And I'm so excited to talk about exploitation. It's one of my, it's one of the things that really drove me as a young attorney. One of the first cases that I had as a civil litigator involved the exploitation of a client who had all her money, $115,000. And at her husband's funeral, the pastor approached her and said, "Hey, why don't you add me to your joint account?" And she was like, "Okay, that seems like a good idea." And she added him, and then he took all her money.
Oh, goodness. That's a terrible situation.
Yeah. And we fought. And after about 2 years of litigating, we got about half the money back. Yeah. And then she died. So it was really sad and it really stuck with me. And that was really the driver for me to kind of try to change these laws in Florida as it came to joint accounts. Right. So we were able to do that. And so we've made a lot of progress here, and but we still have more work to do.
We all do, but so I got a couple of questions for you. Okay. And for our viewers out there, if you have questions, please, we'll take questions at the end. You could always just put your question in the chat box or the Q&A, whichever one you have available to you, and we'll deal with that shortly. So Shannon, what you just gave there was an example of abuse, exploitation. So how do you define abuse? How do you define exploitation? Is there a difference?
Yes. There is a difference. Exploitation is really criminal financial exploitation, and most states separate elder abuse from financial exploitation into different statutes. Okay. We have 7 definitions of exploitation, financial exploitation in Florida, and we have a whole range of different ways to define elder abuse, which can even include something like isolating someone from their family members. So that actually is a crime now in Florida that constitutes elder abuse. So, there's really a wide range of potential causes of action from a criminal perspective where we can protect seniors that people aren't even aware of. And, I'm not as familiar with New York's statutes, but you and I did a little kind of shallow dive into some of them. And I will say that New York could take some notes from Florida.
We'll get into that for sure. But the unfortunate reality is Florida is probably necessarily on the cutting edge of this, but New York does need to catch up.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. And I will say one in 5 seniors over the age of 70 will be scammed. 1 in 5 in the next year. So
Wow.
what do we have? We have 36 people
Yep.
participating today. So if all of you are over the age of 70, you
Right.
can do the math and see that many of you will be scammed within the next year. So it is something that is, unfortunately very prevalent, and our scammers are getting more and more savvy.
There definitely are. And what's interesting is it's not even scammed in their lifetime. It's scammed in the next year.
Yes, it's
Yeah. So that's going
insane.
to even multiply. Wow. Okay. And
Yes.
the difference, it's funny. The use of abuse versus exploitation. So again, because it's not as protected, it's not as much of a topic up here yet.
Yeah.
Exploitation isn't the most common word. There's financial abuse, there can be emotional abuse, there can be a significant number, as you said, a wide range of abuse. But exploitation focuses or hones in on the financial part. Okay.
Correct.
So you mentioned 20% of those over 70, 1 in 5 will be scammed within the next year. Who's at risk? It's not just age-based. What else is there?
So it's anyone who's vulnerable. And,
Okay.
I'd like to take just a minute to talk about the exploitable brain, because I do think that it's
Mm.
very important for us to understand the science about the exploitable brain, right? So we know as attorneys that there's these things called guardianships, and we're very familiar with the incapacitated brain. And what that means for non-lawyers out there is that it's your inability to manage basically every aspect of life. So manage your finances, make decisions about where you live, manage your medical decision making. Those
Right.
are all things that might be determined that you can't do those things yourself anymore, and you require the services of a guardian.
Yeah.
So that's the incapacitated brain. And
Mm.
over many, many years, there was lots of clinical research conducted to help us assess when somebody is not any longer able to do those things, like manage their finances. And so we have these things like the mini mental status exam or the MOCA test, where you might be asked certain questions. And many of you will be familiar with these questions because your doctor may have asked them of you in a recent exam, where they say, spell world forward and backwards, count backwards from 100 by sevens, draw a clock face. All those things
Sure.
that are part of those examinations have
Mm.
been clinically studied for a long time, and determined that if you reach a certain, so if there's 30 questions or there's 30 scored and you get like a 22 or a 23, that may mean that you're incapacitated. And so that assessment is very clear. It's based on clinical research. What we now know is that the exploitable brain, and those are the brains that might be more susceptible to undue influence, that might be more susceptible to those scams or exploitation. Those brains are really what's happening in the 10 years before the incapacity. So
Mm.
what we've learned from the science is that there's actually brain changes in a dementia diagnosis over a 20-year time period.
Yeah.
What we have science-based research to tell us when that incapacity, that incapacitated inability to manage your affairs, starts at year 10.
Mm.
It goes 10 years before, when brain is changing, but we don't have a diagnosable incapacity. That's where the exploitation occurs. And what
Mm.
we know is there's really two things that happen in the brain. It's really a thinning of the cortical insula, which is actually your temple and then a little bit behind your temple. This thinning of the cortical insula basically provides this inability to assess risk and to tell the difference between the truth and a lie. So those are the two factors that we notice. So you may have someone who's very high functioning in a zillion other ways. They're the coach of the basketball team. They, go pick up their grandkids at school. They manage their checkbook. They can do all of these things, but they will write a check to the guy who comes to the door who says, "Hey, I'll cut your tree down. It has canker."
Yeah.
They're going to write that check for $5,000 right there, because they cannot assess risk and they don't have the ability to understand the difference between the truth and a lie. So there was a study that was conducted in 2017 by Nathan Sprang, who's one of the preeminent researchers on this exploitable brain.
Mm-hmm.
And of this study, there were 36 people. Half were exposed to a scam and they took the bait. So they fell victim to the scam. The other half exposed to the scam, they did not take the bait. They put all of them under an MRI. And what they found was 100% of those that fell victim to the scam were actually had that thinning of the cortical insula in the brain. So it's pretty compelling. And now the research is catching up. They're starting to conduct studies. We know that something called, it's the sense of like your organs operating inside your body. Interoception is what it's called. So if you have interoception, then you're less likely to, if you have that ability to kind of feel your own heart beating, or like you notice your organs inside your body, you are more able to tell the difference between the truth and a lie. They've noted that this is one of the current research studies that came out, is that if you continue to have interoception, you're probably not going to get scammed.
More awareness there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The science is finally catching up, but this brain issue, these 10 years, is really where we're seeing that susceptibility. So it's scary.
And we see it with clients, because we could be sitting with the client or the spouse, the children, and they're like, well, dad's become forgetful, and he got lost driving home the other day. Well, when did you first start noticing this? And it'll always be several years earlier. Always. And the losing of the keys and this and that, not picking up after school. So the unfortunate reality is exactly what you're saying, that we need to be mindful of our loved ones before it becomes too obvious. When you start noticing little signs, they may already be within that 10-year window.
Yes. And if it's someone who's been very successful in their lives and they're incredibly intelligent, they're so good at masking. So they have a way of pivoting away from those issues, and they've learned this technique because it's embarrassing,
Sure.
and it's not something anyone's proud of when they get scammed or when they've made a bad financial decision. And then there's also this fear that kind of creeps in, like, if they knew that I had given this money away, then they're going to take away my independence or put me in a nursing home.
Sure.
And one of the things that people don't know is that the number one exploiter is not a stranger. It's actually family members.
Well, that leads to the next topic then. So I'm glad you're going there, because it's really who is perpetrating this. So please go ahead.
Yeah, 60% of exploitation cases are perpetrated by a family member. And so what that means for us is, we've got to be very careful. We've got to recognize when exploitation is happening and really take steps to really kind of keep an eye on the assets, especially when someone's in that 10-year time period.
Can you give an example though? So when we say family, it's not going to be a spouse, right? Can it be a child? It could be.
Yeah.
Children sometimes think they're entitled, or nieces or nephews or grandchildren taken care of.
Right. Or they're in a desperate situation, like they've been named the agent under power of attorney. They're only going to borrow this money for a little while. They'll put the money back once they get on their feet. Or the spouse is saying, well, it's your inheritance, just take it early, or, you're the one taking care of mom all the time. Like, you should just be able to keep the money, and sometimes that type of undue influence is very effective when it's coupled with this whispering in the ear of like, everyone else, no one's taking care of you. I'm the only one. They all want to put you in a nursing home. I'm the only one who will keep you out of the nursing home. Sure. Or they've stolen money from you. Mom, look at your credit card bill. They've stolen money from you. And, it's not even true, but that victim doesn't have the sophistication to tell the difference between the truth and a lie anymore. So whoever's speaking the mantra the loudest in their ear, that's what they attach to. And that's kind of the undue influence side. And this is more lawyer talk, but it is important to recognize that undue influence and the exploitable brain go hand in hand together.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And up here, we also use the phrase, the word duress. So there's the duress, there's the undue influence, again, common between the two states. And those examples you just gave, they happen every day. And I use the word entitled, and we'll see children helping their parents as power of attorney agent, or living with them and helping with different things. And this level of entitlement and overreach and undue influence then can enter. It doesn't always happen, not at all, but it can happen. And that's where we need to be aware of that. So if you sense something is happening to your loved one, all right, to your neighbor, to whomever it might be, what are the signs you should be looking for, right?
Sure.
What are the red flags?
Okay, it's pretty much what we would think it would be. If we see our victim start to withdraw, they develop a new relationship, it's a new best friend, or it's a family member who maybe was on the outs and now has come into the fold. And then there's this secretiveness that comes along. So all of a sudden they've changed banks. Oh, why did you change banks, Mom? You used to share that information with me. Oh, I've decided I can get a better interest rate at this bank. And now they're no longer sharing that information.
Right.
And they're being very secretive about transfers, or if you ask them about a particular transaction, they get mad because, they've maybe been told by the exploiter, they're going to want to find out, why you're paying me to be your caregiver. And, it's just our business. It's private. It's none of their business. They just want the money for themselves, all this stuff, so that secretiveness. Some of the other things that can happen is, like we had a case where the exploiter had, redone deeds. And then they built a fence around our little lady's house, and they were the only ones with the key. It's about control. It's about changing phone numbers, and that isolation and lies. All of a sudden, if mom or dad starts saying things that, you're like, where did that come from? I know you guys took the equity out of my house, or I know you guys put a credit card in my name, or, things that are just not true. And all of a sudden our person has attached to it. Because there's one other thing, Brian, that I think is really important to kind of explain here. And that is that the exploitable brain can attach to a delusion. And even when you're able to show the person that the delusion is untrue, that delusional attachment may remain. So just to give you a quick example, we have a lady, beautiful woman, amazing. Her husband died. She went on Millionaire Match. She met this guy. He's not real. He's a scammer. He's in Africa. We know who he is. He stole these pictures from this podcaster in Dubai. And he, over the course of 2 years, has stolen $2.2 million from Our Lady.
Overseas.
Yes. She has been convinced that he's this Polish ambassador, that he's going to come and sweep her off her feet. And even when we have completely proven to her that he is not real, she has attached to the delusion because her currency, the thing that she wants more than anything else, is to fill the void in her little heart.
Yeah.
And he's doing that for her. So she doesn't even care what it costs. So it took us getting a guardianship, trying to stop the rest of her money from going out the door, but she remains attached to the delusion. Yeah. So, that is the difficult thing. We have another case involving $7 million. It was a venture capitalist, a very, very successful man during his life. And then they figured out what his currency is. And do you know how they figure it out? When they're talking to you on the phone and they learn about who you are and they learn about what you love, what your currency is. That's why it's so important not to speak to scammers on the phone, because once they figure out your currency, they can take you for the ride of your life, and they will not stop until they get every nickel.
So we've had several cases throughout the years, of course, dealing with clients, and there was one sweet lady. I still could picture her house. No, remember where she is, right over in Huntington Station over here. And her husband had passed, and somehow scammers got her phone number. All right. And once you're on a list, it's very hard to get you off those lists. They sell those lists. And there was some cause that had to deal with the Canadian Mounties, the horse patrol, the law enforcement.
Sure.
And there was, over the course of 2 years, over $300,000 transferred via Western Union to this organization.
Right.
And the daughter, who was out of state, started, and this is one of the flags we could talk about, is start noticing bank account, right there, the withdrawals, the transfers, the balance decreasing. So the daughter got involved. We started establishing trusts and different access points for the money. but it was by mail, it was by UPS, it was by, they had her and they weren't going to let go. So
Right.
this certainly
Yeah.
happened.
And let me give a little tool right now, because I think this could be helpful.
Mhm.
Every client that we have in the life care planning practice, we
Yeah.
enroll in the Careful app. And the
Mhm.
Careful app, it's Careful, C-A-R-E, Careful with 2 L's. And the way
Mhm.
to find this particular app is getcareful.com. And what it does is it doesn't create a way to freeze the assets, but it's a monitoring system.
Mm.
So when a payment goes out to a nefarious recipient, when you pay a bill twice, when you forget to pay a bill, the Careful app sends out a notification to the people that you've identified as your trusted contacts. And
Mhm.
then they can like see the red flag and go like, Mom, what's happening? Why are you sending money to a scammer in Africa?
Yeah.
So the Careful app has become a very powerful tool for us to get
Mm.
the first indicator of that exploitation.
That's a great service for clients. And what for our viewers, what Shannon shared is, Shannon and I know each other. We're colleagues within this life care planning elder care practice where we help our seniors with not only the legal, the financial, but also the care advocacy and care coordination. So it's a very holistic approach, and that Careful app is a great addition. We'll look into it over here. I hadn't heard of that before. Okay, so now what you've proven already in the 20-25 minutes we've been talking here is you know this stuff. You've been leading the charge in Florida against this, which is wonderful. What happens to a scammer in Florida, right? So, and then we're going to compare it to New York, if as close as we can. But
Yeah.
there's remedies, so to speak. So there's laws on the book that you've been helpful in getting there. So talk to us about what happens and what Florida has done.
Okay, so let's talk about, definitions of exploitation. So even in Florida, under the recent laws, if you have a long-standing estate plan and an undue influencer comes in and takes you to an attorney, or pulls a new will or trust off the internet and changes your estate plan, that's actually a crime in Florida. So that's a new one. We also
Mm.
have what are called exploitation disinheritance laws. So if you actually exploit someone, you can be disinherited from receiving money from their estate. Seems like a very common sense thing, but it's very new. We didn't have that before. So you could have exploited someone and
Yeah.
then still inherited under
Yeah.
their estate. Yeah. So
Interesting.
yeah. So
Similar to that homicide statute, right? You can't inherit.
similar to Slayer statute. Yeah, that's what we call it. Yeah. Yep. Very similar.
Okay.
So yeah. And so, but the really powerful tool that we have in Florida is something called the Exploitation Injunction. And
Mm.
we're in the middle of one right now in our law firm. And
Mm.
basically what it does is it allows us to go ex parte. And what that means is we can go to the judge without notifying the exploiter that exploitation has occurred. And usually we have a very high standard. It's a clear and convincing evidence standard, which means that we need to attach bank statements. We need affidavits swearing that this money was taken. But
Mm.
once that's filed, the judge, without notifying the exploiter, can actually freeze the exploiter's assets. So if you can prove that the assets went from the victim into the exploiter's account, the judge will freeze the exploiter's account. And that's what we have right now in this one case that we're dealing with, where the daughter stole $225,000 from the mother. We've now freezed the daughter and her husband's account, which is
Wow.
beautiful, because then we have a hearing. And then, the beauty of these hearings, during that time where it's frozen in the hearing,
Mhm.
there's a no contact provision. So the exploiter can't come around and
Right.
get mom to back off her position. They're not allowed to have contact, or it's actually a felony. And then what we do at this hearing is the exploiter comes in and says, oh, it was a gift. And we get them
Mhm.
on the record saying it was a gift. And
Mhm.
that's not a defense. That's not a defense to exploitation. So, one of the things that we do very effectively is then we'll take that case and we'll walk it over to the state attorney's office and have them prosecute the case. And just
Wow.
to give you an example of what we've been able to do here is we had a case in Gainesville, it was about a year ago, and it was a $2.5 million exploitation of a trustee against his mother. The trustee stole all the money out. The mother had no money left.
Mm.
And we were able to get the local law enforcement to prosecute the case. We did prosecute it. He pled guilty, but he is now serving a 12-year prison sentence for that exploitation.
The child. Wow.
That is the highest sentence that we've seen in exploitation in the state of Florida. But that's the kind of sentencing that we should be seeing. When you steal money from someone, no matter if it's your parent, it is still theft. And so we're getting our judges on board to understand that this is just like any other crime. So we're actually making some headway here. Now,
That's
that's
amazing.
not to say that we're able to do that in every case.
Of
You know,
course.
like this case we have right now, we tried to get law enforcement involved and they were like, it sounds like a civil matter. That's what they always say. It sounds like a civil matter. So,
Yeah.
sometimes you've got to kind of get to the head. Like we go straight to the state attorney's office and talk to the state attorney and get them engaged on this because it's great PR for them. So sometimes you have to pull the political card. But
So that's a great example of what doesn't happen in New York. Unfortunately, New York is behind the times in this. I mean, I'll give you a brief example. We, sweet old gentleman in his house, confined by wheelchair most of the time, hired an aide. Aide was really the only one there, able to build a relationship, a confidential relationship, undue influence. The red flag, this was a number of years ago, I think was a niece or some other more distant relative have gotten involved, not children. And there was several $100,000 missing from the bank account, and the house was now out of his name
God.
in the name of the caregiver. Okay. Now we got our hands on all of the bank statements and we went through the ATM withdrawals. They're all at 12 midnight, 1 a.m. in Manhattan. This gentleman in the wheelchair isn't partying at 1 a.m. in midnight. And we took it to the Queens County District Attorney's Office. And they said, well, how do we know he didn't give his ATM card to the aide? Well, you can investigate it for one. And they wouldn't touch it. Over $200,000. They wouldn't touch it. And the house wouldn't touch it.
Yeah, and that's really the problem here. And so, on the other side of that, Brian, when we get cases like that, I had a similar case like that, and it was in a circuit, and I couldn't convince the prosecutor to prosecute it. Then we did something called a civil theft demand. And I don't know if you guys have this in New York, but it creates a treble damages cause of action. So we give a notice to the exploiter and we say, give the property back. And if you don't, then you're going to owe triple the value of the property that you stole under this statute. And what we find in those circumstances is oftentimes they'll give it back because they don't want to be stuck with having to pay triple. Plus, we get attorney's fees for that as well. So that can also be a good leverage tool. And I don't know if they have that there in New York or not, but it would certainly be something that might, if we're going to start talking about getting New York to catch up on these issues, that would be another thing to add because it ends up being another tool in our toolbox. We have a lot of tools right now.
We're going to be talking more about this, Shannon.
Okay.
So the next question really we were talking about it is what can New York do to better protect its residents, its seniors, and legislation moves slow. So it's going to take a couple of years, but this is a significant topic. It's critical. It's not even something that's important. This is critical. So it's time for us in New York to start pushing this type of legislation and getting some legislators behind it. So that's what we're going to talk more about.
Yeah. And the one other thing that I wanted to put on your radar, and you and I talked about this briefly, is doing things like, so now that we have this exploitation injunction, we can use something called a pre-need consent against exploitation. So I have found when I have clients come into my office and I say, look, we can put some things in your trust and we can have you sign this document that says in advance that if you start to be scammed or exploited, you want your loved ones to lock your money down. And when I first started doing it, I was like, people aren't going to want that. Like, there's no way people are going to want that. I have never had a client not want it. Wow. Because they all know someone who lost everything to an exploiter or a scammer, and they do not want that to be them. Wow. So, what we've done is we've created this pre-need consent against exploitation so that if they start to be scammed, their kids can walk into court and get that asset freeze that we talked about. And then secondly, we use something called a Ulysses clause in our trust-based planning that allows someone to say in advance, like, I want these people to be able to remove me as a trustee and create this layer of protection where I can't no longer revoke my trust. A new successor trustee comes to play. And then sometimes we have it's almost like if an expenditure is made over a certain amount, then that trust protector or that person who's like operating as your overseer would have to approve that transaction before it goes out. So when you're talking about, sending those Western Union checks, that trust protector would have to agree that those checks can go out in order for that to move on. So Ulysses clauses in trust-based planning has become something that people want. We've done so much of this exploitation protection now. The other beautiful thing about the life care planning practice in general is that when we have people in like this, I like to think of it as like the river, right? And we're kind of keeping them in the middle of the raft. And so as they're in the river, if they all of a sudden start to be unduly influenced by someone who's going to try and change their estate plan, guess what? They're coming back to us and we're going to be like, wait a minute. No, I don't think so. So we can really do a good job with that life care planning model to protect against undue influence.
100%. So those are some great provisions. Again, not very common. Again, not utilized in New York, but we're going to look into that further. Now that would only happen because the one thing clients want is to keep control. So that would only occur if there was a decline in capacity.
Correct. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. Or they start to be scammed. So the way that we have the language crafted is like, if this person decides that I'm being scammed, I'm giving all the discretion to them to agree that that's what's happening. I no longer have the ability to unwind that. So it is a bit of a power giveaway.
Sure.
But what I've found is that people are like, no, if I start giving my money away, absolutely. I want my child to take that reign away.
Yes. Yeah. So I think what we're also saying here is there are things that can be done to help our loved ones, or even as seniors and clients ourselves someday, there are things we can do to protect ourselves against this. And I would think that the legal planning, the estate planning that we're talking about, the use of a trust, revocable trust, having trustees involved, power of attorneys, very comprehensive power of attorney with successors, having a proper estate plan in place, proper trust planning in place with a firm that knows what they're doing. All right. Shannon, I had a financial advisor friend send me a signed 2012 trust that his client has. It's not our client yet. It's an irrevocable. It says, this is make up the name. This is the Smith Irrevocable Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. Okay, we're looking at it. This is 11 years ago, 2012. The second paragraph on the first page says that, yes, exactly. The trustee can distribute principal back to the grantor. Okay, so again, there are attorneys out there that don't know this type of work, and yet they will take the case, find a form, or Frankenstein their own, and it's not helping the client. In fact, right now, we're jeopardizing 11 years of asset protection that could have been if they went to the right firm. So it's crucial. You wanna not only look at websites, right? You wanna talk to your friends. You wanna look at reviews. Meet with an attorney and ask a list of questions about their experience. I mean, Shannon, nearly 30 years. I'm over 25 years. You need people that specialize in this for sure.
So much. And again, like you can, get a form off the internet or go to LegalZoom or whatever. But in the end, like, is that really where you want to save a nickel? Because this could be like, for the rest of, are you going to have your money for the rest of your life? And then is it going to go to your kids when you die? Or is there going to be a big will contest? And then all of a sudden, like I had a will the other day from LegalZoom and it had no residuary clause. It said, give money to this person and this person. I want you to give $100 to this person, $100 to this person. But what do you do with the rest of it? There was no residuary clause. So guess what? We have to go back to intestate. And that was not their wish, but they got the document off LegalZoom. And so, what do you do with that? It's terrible.
It's a shame. It's a crying shame because most of the clients were doing that. They're well-intentioned. They just don't realize, but this is why we do events like this. We want to get the word out that there are experts that deal with these issues and can help you and your family. Shannon, this has been wonderful. You're an expert at this. I'm grateful to call you a friend and a colleague. I think this was great, for sure. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, but I see some questions in the
Yeah. So
Q&A.
let's see what we got here. Hopefully, and if there's more questions, okay, paragraphs here. So let's see if I can summarize. All right. So my late father had substantial assets in his own financial accounts. He gave the brother, I guess another child, the power of attorney. My brother refuses to disclose our father's financial information. So to me, that's a red flag. I'm sure it is to you as well. So one son is the POA agent, and he isn't talking to
Yeah.
anybody else. So what would you say in that situation?
Well, I mean, what we would probably do is, try and informally demand that accounting. Like
Mhm.
if that person has an attorney, we'd probably then, have to litigate that issue. So
Sure.
I don't know how it is in New York, but after someone dies in Florida and you open a probate, you actually have
Mhm.
subpoena power. So
Mhm.
we could subpoena the financial records directly from the bank. We could certainly ask the agent to provide that information to us, but we could actually issue a third-party subpoena directly to the bank to look at that stuff directly.
Yeah. So again,
Yeah, you kind of have a duty to do that if you're the personal representative. So yeah, there's a way to get the info.
So the next question is a similar fact scenario, but the parent's already deceased. And how can they go back? So again, it's going to be a court proceeding. It's going to be a probate proceeding or an administration proceeding here in New York, but it is an uphill battle. It is really an uphill battle because the probate proceeding is really focusing on the will. If the assets were removed prior to death, they're not subject to the will. It's a very difficult proceeding. Up
It
in New
is.
York.
It is. And and I don't know if they have something similar in New York, but in Florida, we have something called intentional interference with an expectancy, where if you removed assets from the estate prior to death, you can actually sue the person who took the money, even if you're not the personal representative of the estate. So there's a way to actually
Wow.
create this. There's this, direct cause of action. So like, let's say, for example, someone retitled, like you were talking about, Brian, where this caregiver had the deed retitled. We could actually sue that person directly as a beneficiary, even if she named herself as the PR in the will. We could actually sue her directly as a beneficiary because
Wow.
it's not an estate asset. So there's this cause of action called intentional interference with an expectancy, where we could sue her if we're able to prove that undue influence. Then we can actually shift the burden onto her to prove that she didn't unduly influence. I mean, I'm sorry, if you're a care provider and you have to be in the home to provide care, the person clearly is lower capacity and the undue influence is likely going to stick with any judge. So they're probably going to have to prove that this is what he wanted, and there's not going to be any way to prove that. So that deed will probably come back.
Wow.
And what I love about deeds is that you can like put what's called a lien on the deed when you file an action, so that they can't sell the property.
Yes.
So yeah, you probably
So
have that too.
that's one thing you can do in New York. After this 45 minutes, that's the one thing you can do in New York. Oh, the Liz Pendens. Everything else, we're behind the times.
Right.
So the next question is there a certain age when a trustee should take over the financial affairs and then have an obligation to account to the brothers and sisters? I think what we've said today is there's really no set age. It's about the grantor, the parent's wishes, and it's about the exploitable brain and how they're living and what they're doing with their money. So it's a case by case situation for sure.
Yeah, and we have a definition in Florida about who is a vulnerable adult, and one of them is, infirmities of aging, right? And so I always say, like, for women, that's usually around, 92. For men, it may be as young as 85. And there's always someone in the room who stands up in the back and they're like, I'm 97, I drive myself everywhere, I take care of my grandkids, like it's, so there is, we can't really be ageist and say that it happens to some people, because you probably have clients, Brian, that drive to your office. I have a client who's over 100 who drives to my office and wants his stuff reviewed every year, and he's great. So, it really, it's hard to like draw a hard line. But honestly, like our lady that we have the exploitation injunction for right now, she's 94 and she's done the affidavit, and I'm ready for her to testify because she's very clear thinking, but she's also very vulnerable. So there's a lot of things that people in those older ages can still function very highly and do, but we need to be very cautious and watch and just, be a helper. Like, you
Sure.
don't have to take authority away. Maybe you come on as a co-trustee if they'll let you do that.
Mhm.
And sometimes what I find is people are afraid to have that conversation with their loved one. But when they do have it, because the lawyer's like, do you want to resign? They're like, yes, I do. I'm sick of doing this job. And then the child can come and take over. And the mom is glad that they didn't have to stay in this job anymore that they hate.
Right. Great point. Great point. All right, that's it on the questions. And again, so Shannon, if you have folks in Florida, again, you're a Florida attorney. We've been talking about how things operate in Florida and in general. But your website is?
The MillerElderLawFirm.com.
Okay, Miller Elder Law Firm.
Honestly, like, we have a ton of videos on YouTube. And if you just type in the Miller Elder Law Firm for our YouTube channel, you can find videos, all about the exploitable brain. We actually have a lot of the experts on our YouTube channel who we did an exploitation conference here in Florida a couple years back, and they talk about the studies and the research, and it's very compelling. David Francaccio, who works with Marketplace Radio on NPR, has done some really good deep dives into the exploitable brain, and he's also come down and testified as an expert in, various ways down here in Florida. So he's been very engaged. You can kind of see him talking there as well on our YouTube channel.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon. Great to see you. I'll see you next month for another event.
Yes. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Thank you for everybody joining us. Bye-bye, Shannon.
Bye-bye.